We have already seen that this parametric selector tag is also part of the parametric tool. And this basically keeps the all point selection tag active. So you can still use deformations, FFDs with parametric objects and still change the amount of polygons these objects have, for instance. But the tag itself has also a lot of individual functionality, which I would like to show you right now. So let's say we have this kind of cylinder, which has maybe some additional rounding, and you would like to apply some materials to this cylinder. So if you like to limit the texturing or the materials, let's say on the caps or the roundings, it would be quite tricky to do this, as those kinds of selections are not supported basically by default. So you would have to use some workarounds using the correction deformation, and again you would have that kind of problem that anytime you change something about the polygon count, the selections would lose contact with the object. So what we can do now is just add this selection tag to the object and have a look at the dialog it offers. So it might look a little bit complex at first, but basically it's just most of the time one pair of options you have, and it just depends on how many selections you like to add to this option or object. So let's start off with the typical cap selection that has this short C. So C1 is the first cap, C2 is the second cap, R1, R2 are the roundings. So these kind of shortcuts are the same as with the extrude, loft, lace and sweep objects. They also use the same naming conventions for their caps and roundings. So let's say we would like to have this topmost cap, and that would be along the y-axis of the object. So I'm just ticking this create C1 selection and hit the create selection button. So you can see here we have our selection. So I'm just adding a new material, dragging this to the object and applying the selection to it, which is named C1. And you can see our material is now just applied to the topmost cap, thanks to this option. To keep this updated so that anytime you change something about the polygon count here, you can see normally something like this would happen and you would be forced to do the selection again. You just keep this update button checked or option. So this always checks about the amount of polygons and points and keeps all the selections updated. Another option we have is the threshold value. The threshold value defines the selection based on the curvature of the surface. So basically by lowering the threshold, you can see that we can now make this selection grow across the surface, so it finally includes the complete rounding as well. You could of course do the same with a separate selection here. So we can just keep this to a high value and tick R1, hit create selections again. There we have the second selection tag. Maybe use another material for it, apply it to the rounding selection. There you are. And again, we have this threshold value, so you can grow and shrink this selection. So it's based on the curvature of the surface. So you can decide how many polygons you like to have to be included in that selection. The same is for the other side as well. It just depends on the top cap direction menu here. And then you can, of course, have separate selections for the other side of the object here as well. This works perfectly fine for everything you find here, but also, of course, for your own object. So it doesn't have to be a parametric object. It could be just a simple polygon object, basically, as well. If there are some areas, some flat areas with surrounding rounded polygon areas, those could be processed through these thresholds here as well. So that's basically the top part of this dialog. There's a special feature here which is called Create Cubic Selection. So just let me show this as well. So I'm just moving or removing these selections here for now. And I'm creating this cubic selection and applying, let's say, the reddish material here to this curvature. And by increasing the threshold, you should see, there you are, that we get some kind of cubic mapping around the cylinder, so that the sides facing towards the standard directions of plus, minus, x, y, and z are excluded from the selection, and only the parts in between are added to this selection. So that might be handy, for instance, to get all the roundings of a cube or cubic shapes in one step. Just removing this for now again to come to this second part of the dialog. So now we can have an object to define a selection. So how does this work? So basically it makes sense to choose just a null object and drag and drop this to the object field. And then we can decide how the null object and the position of the null should be used to create a selection. So let's start off with the plane and create this selection. There we have it. I'm just adding this to the material. And as we have too few polygons here in the height, I'm just adding a couple of more polygons, segments here on the cylinder, so we can better see the effect this has. You can see that we can use the null object to move around this virtual plane. Of course, you can also rotate this. And all the polygons that are on the positive y-axis side of this plane will be selected, stored in the tag, and so you can apply any kind of material to it. Additional shapes are a sphere. So here we are. You can see it's a spherical shape we have. And we have a cylinder. And we have a cube. All of these can be individually shaped, of course, scaled, to get more complex-like selections. Something like this, maybe. Of course, it depends on the amount of subdivision your object has. And you can have this tolerance, so that every polygon is included in the selection that is at least with 1 point part of the given shape. Or if this switched off, then only those polygons are selected that are completely within the given shape. The last part, so just let me clear this out again and remove the selection for now. The last part has two different options. The first one is to create random selections, and the second part is to filter out specific sizes of polygons. So I'm just using this one, create a selection, which is called a random selection. And now we can use the minimum and maximum polygon size. Just trying to find the point. You can see that by increasing this value that we can filter out basically all the polygons that are smaller than the number given here. And on the other side, we can filter out polygons that are larger than what we have here. So to get selections like this very easy, even though the cylinder has a lot of subdivisions here, but these surfaces here on top are larger than the ones in the middle. So we can use this to filter out the polygons we don't want to see. Something like this maybe. And of course you can always invert the result here as well. So this is the first functionality we have here. So I'm just setting this back to larger and smaller numbers. So we basically get everything. So the second feature we have here is a random selection, which is basically controlled by this threshold. So this is some kind of contrast value that is used together with this turbulence field or noise field used for the random selection. The size, of course, can be controlled by this value here. So it depends if you like to see some cloud-like selections or if basically every polygon just should have an individual selection. And this is also animated by default. That's why we have a speed here. So whenever you click play, you can see that the selection will change based on the speed value you have given here. And of course, this is also depending on the start value, which is the seed value here. So you get different kinds of noises anytime you change this number here. You know the principle maybe from the landscape fractal object. Again, this can also be inverted and also be used in combination with the minimum and maximum polygon size. You can see that you can use this to filter out some specific areas where you maybe don't want to have any selection to happen. Something like this maybe. So this should also be quite useful for some special effects maybe, as you can use this tag in combination, of course, with all the other features Cinema 4D offers. Let's say, for instance, the Mo extrude from MoGraph, as this can be limited to a polygon selection as well, as you can see here. To have something like this, or of course to apply some dynamics or hair effects or whatever you like to use, or simply some materials, of course. Just keep in mind that this auto tag update feature keeps the selections alive. And the second important thing is that the tag itself finds the selections by name. So whenever you rename one of the created selections tags, the update feature might not work anymore. So of course you can also use this to create many different kind of random tags, for instance. So just by, let's say, renaming this and changing the random speed and just creating a new one. So you can have basically many different kinds of random tags on the same object. So that's why this is name dependent. So every time you change the name, the tag will not longer be seen by this parametric selection tag.